As always, all right, welcome everybody. We've officially started to record here. As always, if you have questions throughout, somebody will probably try to answer them as we go along, Jessica or somebody from the standards committee. If not, I will get to them at the end. I'll definitely either attempt to answer your question or make up something clever where you think I answered your question, and then we'll clarify it later. But yeah, that's how this is going to roll. So, all right, welcome. We're doing Invoice 1.0 today. I realize we have not touched on this standard. So we're trying to keep education a mix between technical focus on the standards and then kind of what's going on in PromoStandards world. So you'll see us bounce back a little bit between walking through standards, previewing new standards, and keeping everybody up to date with PromoStandards itself and kind of what's happening with different committees. So let's get started. Like I said, let's just a list of acronyms. Let's keep everybody busy for the first 2 minutes of the meeting. But so I'm Jon Norris. I am on the membership marketing education committee. Participate on the education work group there. So Becky from Sanmar is heading up a lot of our planning and wrangling and herding cats for education this year. So she wrangled me in to do this one this week. So third Tuesday of every month at 2 p.m. Eastern, we do education. So you can just put that reminder on your calendar now, then or subscribe to the Eventbrite notifications, and you'll get it that way. So let's get this party started real quick. Some housekeeping issues, very important. I think it's important that we kind of roll over this. What is PromoStandards' mission? PromoStandards, we collaborate to create industry-leading open standards. It's an important piece, right? We strive and every day to make sure that we maintain that ethos of the open standard portion, that we're meeting all sectors of the industry, from service providers, suppliers, distributors, from the $2 billion supplier to the $100 distributor. We want to make sure that we're enabling everybody. So enable industry participants to improve customer experience, reduce transactional friction, and effectively execute the digital strategy. So that's what we're about. Everything we do comes back to that. So let's go. For those of you who haven't, I know if you do education every month, you just get used to this slide. I'm just going to keep hammering it. Save the date here. Don't go plan your February vacation. We've kind of scheduled around everybody's breaks, holidays. This is a pretty awesome date. We're looking forward to, down in St. Pete Beach, right outside of Tampa. So save the date. We're gonna, see more details coming out in about 3 months, is my guess. So that's happening. Tech Summit and Hackathon. It's a pretty awesome event. We had 156 people there last year. We're shooting for 200 this year. So awesome venue. Get ready for it. Real quick, one last piece of housekeeping before we get started. Amy and Becky and Jessica always post nice things into the general channel that nobody responds to, so I figured I'd call out them here. If you have, for the 2024 Tech Summit, if you have any interest and ideas for things that you'd like to see, topics, if you'd like to volunteer as a speaker, if you'd like to volunteer as a panelist, hit up Amy or Jessica in Slack. If you're not in Slack, email Jessica. She's at admin@promostandards.org. So definitely do that. We want to hear from you now. In the next month or two, it's the time to get your word in. Then we will be contacting people to try to assemble a work group to get the agenda together, and then just the ins and outs of the events. Becky has also posted about the virtual hackathon work group. So she and Baroni from Zoom are looking for other volunteers to kind of get the virtual hackathon underway. So that's a September kind of event that we're going to be throwing. It was thrown as a virtual event last year, and we weren't planning on it, but it actually worked out much better than we had anticipated. So we're going to roll it with it as another virtual event this year. So if you want to get involved in the planning of that, hit up Becky. She's in Slack, Becky Ellis. And then one last thing is we're always looking for education ideas and topics. We've been trying to mix it up this year. Last month was Stephen Stanley from ePromos. Jay from Sanmar was the month before. I think we have Dave Schultz coming up here in a future month. So trying to mix it up a little bit this year, get some variety in the education sessions. So, all right, that's the last bit of housekeeping. So let's get into this. We should probably end a few minutes early today. We'll see how much into the weeds we get, but let's go. For those of you who have been around, you've seen kind of this life cycle of PromoStandards. There's services that are kind of live on the peripheral of this that support PromoStandards. You'll see more of that coming because I know the standards committee is cranking out pretty cool stuff these days, and they have a lot in their pipeline that they're beta testing, alpha testing, kind of flushing through concepts, and a lot to come from there. But I've updated kind of these numbers on, inventory order status, order shipment notification. That's the core 3. That's the low hanging fruit. Wide adoption there in terms of supplier adoption and endpoints. You're looking at 100, 200 suppliers on inventory, and then 124, 110 on OSN and order status. The product data has some crazy high numbers of adoption and implementations. So that's your plus 300 and all of those. But if you've listened to many of my education sessions, I have this heartfelt appreciation for the invoice service that gets no love and gets no love and doesn't get the flashy numbers of adoption that the other services get. So we're here today. We're going to save the invoice service. We're going to promote it, and we're going to let everybody know why it's actually something that if I could do this over again, I would have implemented first. If I were a distributor consuming this or a service provider, I'd probably consume it early on. It doesn't get the flashy love of having a cool button that shows inventory. But for those of you and those are the people in your office that vouch invoices, implementing the invoice service, they will love you if you can do this. So let's go. So who's adopting this right now? Interestingly enough, I kind of pulled this through. I took last year's ASI top 40 and wanted to see what kind of market penetration did the invoice service have. And I took of the top 14, there's 9 of the top 14 suppliers have this service live right now. And I would say, essentially of the 10, I think that really, some of these are fringe players. The 10 players on this list that matter, 9 out of 10 of them have adopted the invoice service 1.0. So, if you're sitting there on the fringe, be like, well, what suppliers are adopting this? Of those 32 that I showed a slide ago, the top 7 in the industry, top 6 in the industry, they've all adopted this. So Gemline, Snugs, Magnet, and obviously the top players there in the industry. I ran down the top 40 and converted it to industry sales, and I estimate that about $16 billion in promo sales are done with suppliers that are adopting the invoice service. So what does that leave? Another 8 billion out there that we haven't touched yet. So we're gonna reach those further edges of that. But if you're always one of those people looking at the numbers, like, I don't think there's enough people adopting this for me to jump in. So you're wrong. So it's a wide level adoption here, and it's good to see. This is, I'm really gonna sell this service today. It's a big one for me. Real quick, I just kind of pulled some screenshots. If you're looking for the actual listings of who has what, you can always go onto the PromoStandards website, log in, and then the endpoint listing will show up for you. This is the current list where you see, obviously, there's the larger players that have, but there's still a lot of, I guess, very medium and small suppliers who have jumped on this. Right, somebody like a Harrytown, which isn't your flashy top 10 supplier. So it shows you don't have to be a mega large supplier for this implementation to make sense. Akron Rural right up the road from me, they're adopting this. So it's a good service implement. So like I said, got to give it some love. So let's go. So really kind of intro into Invoice 1.0. So kind of the purpose today, this is being recorded and we're going to post this to YouTube. So if you have somebody at your team you want to show it to, we'll make sure that we can get the information out to them as we go. But the overall, the purpose of this is, as you would expect, to communicate invoices from distributor customer to distributor customers without using email, right? There's a lot of fallacies and downsides of using email as and we all do it, right? We're all hit the invoice button, generates an email, sends it to the customer, right? We actually still have a handful of customers that would prefer to get their invoices snail mail to them. I think they think that the clock starts when they get it delivered, but it's not helping anybody. So, we've made this progression where we converted. I know when I started in this industry, 90% of our invoices were being physically mailed. Now it's probably 95% are being emailed versus physically mailed. And now we have this large contingent of distributor customers who are consuming their invoices electronically because they realize all the benefits. So this thing started, we'll go back to the PromoStandards Wayback Machine of history. This invoice service kind of it was birthed in 2017. Probably one of those PromoStandards services that was drawn up in a bar somewhere in Florida, probably in the Tampa area, if I had to kind of remember. It could have been one of those while we were watching a hockey game in the Stanley Cup playoffs this time of year. But we went live with it. There was a beta that circled early on because we wanted to flush this out to make sure we got this right. And after a few years of this weird 001 beta circling around, we officially, once PromoStandards became a formalized entity, we made the service live and published it January 2020. So it probably had really bad timing as a service for when it was released. It was released in Vegas, and then 2 months later, the world ended, and here we are. So we're going to kind of give it its rebirth here as a service and make sure that everybody knows how cool it is. But the original authors, kind of shout out to Stephen Lewiser, Peter Tu, and Paul Fleischman, the old style SAR from PCNA. So thanks to that crew for giving this thing some love and pushing it over the hump here. All right, so invoices in general, I think it's a very simple service. It's not the ominous PPC or even a product data 2.0 where there's a ton of fields. It's invoices. This isn't rocket science, and there's pretty much two basic methods, and then some, the requests underneath those. So there's the get invoices method, which is get invoices, and then there's the get voided invoices. And the concept behind that was now if I had to think about it, in theory, we probably have very little activity on the get voided invoices, even though we have it implemented. But get invoices, I would say, is 99% of the activity in the service. So we're going to focus on that. We'll touch on the get voided invoices there at the end, but let's dive into this thing. As with many of the order SPOS related services, call them OSN, OSN 2.0, very, very similar request structures. The same three fields are the same in every service: version, ID, password. Get it together there on your strong passwords. Query type, we're going to dive into that in a second. Reference number is, purchase order number or invoice number. So this is different, right? So many of the other, many of the other services, OSN and OS, you can query by supplier sales order, which is our supplier internal sales number. This one is obviously invoice number. Let's say the invoice number that you're looking for, you can go back and pull the details, or you're, as a distributor, sends me, a supplier, an invoice. Obviously, I'm retaining their purchase order number. They can always query it by their purchase order number. Also, there is the requested date. This field, and you can kind of tell as we move these services along in their lifespan, we kind of tried to get a little more descriptive into not just saying. I would say the initial request would have said request date, and then we've tried to really explain these out. So one unique thing about this is a date, not a date time. So essentially, if you're saying, Starline, give me all of my invoices that invoiced on 5/16, you would pass in 516, and that would give you. Now you can go back into the Wayback Machine and say, give me everything from 515. But in theory and practice, the way it works is we invoice on a daily basis. We invoice every day. I would say most suppliers invoice every day. Many and most are probably invoicing day of or night of shipment, and the rest are invoicing next day. So this is just a little nuance. There is that date field there. So real quick on the query types, as we've talked about, this is pretty standard. If you look at the other services, just you can search by PO, invoice number, date search. So where do these query types go? So backwards here, that query type, you should put in 1, 2, 3, or 4. It's easy to go. I'm going to show some examples of this as we go forward, so it's not just all reading documentation. Obviously, the date search is a query type. And really, what's the purpose of these query types is to let the supplier service know what fields they're going to be looking for. So if you fill out the date search, we're going to go and query that date field, and that's what we're going to pull. Be pulling out, and same thing with invoice and purchase order number. And then we got the available date search, date time search. So this is you see this in a lot of the other standard services. It's basically pumping a date, and you get anything from that date and greater. So if you were a large distributor and probably were looking for all of your invoices, you might back them up a day or two and catch, maybe the supplier, you couldn't get it the day before. So you put in 5/1, you're going to pull everything from May 1st to today, and it'll give you 16 days of invoices. So date range greater than, all based off the date search, invoice number, PO number search. All right. So this is the structure, I guess, if you had to look at the whole Get Invoices response. I'm going to dive into a little bit of this, but we'll just kind of stay on this page here for a second. So obviously the Get Invoices response in the top left here, it can return an array of invoices, right? This is if you search by a PO number, you're going to get one, or an invoice number, you're going to get one invoice. If you search by a date, you're going to get many invoices. So that whole that is just the mechanism to return an array of invoices of data, or to return some sort of error message saying, no invoices found, or you screwed up your request, yada, yada, yada. Now, that obviously, let's dive into that invoice array. We're going to, next screen here, pull out some highlights, some nuances of the fields. But in general, you have your invoices, you have the line items on that invoice over there on the right. And then over here, this is where you started to see the standardization of the standards. The bill to and sold to, it's pretty standard convention that was in the purchase order. We tried to mimic the purchase order standard with the invoice standard to keep them cohesive. This account info type information is something you see a lot of it is contact info replicated through all the standards. OSN 2.0 adopted this. And then down here, which everybody's favorite thing, taxes, God love them. That's tax information is down there as well. So we're going to focus today not on these, bill to account information. Really, the two big pieces of this are the invoice and the invoice line items. As you know, there are no invoice parts, right? There is no part IDs. Part IDs is part of the line items, but nobody really cares about the configuration at the invoice. The invoice, essentially every invoice that you've ever seen, is a list of line items. Those line items can be either charges, they could be products. Those products can have parts, but at the end of the day, you're listing a list of things on your invoice. That's what we're calling invoice line items. So we don't want to overcomplicate this thing with the configuration, because that's all in the purchase order, not so much in the invoice. All right. So real quick, these are the fields, and I'm not going to read this. I'm just going to highlight the ones that I think are interesting or nuanced. And as with anything in every service, Jay and his best practices committee is looping through all of the existing standards and providing best practices. So, I'm going to blur out some things that, we see in the wild and kind of some guidance here. But his committee publishes all on PromoStandards.org the best practices for every committee. I know they're cycling through, it's a grind, right? Going through field by field, standard by standard, saying what you should do here and what the what PromoStandards recommends to do here. So give them some time. They're going to make it through all the standards. So eventually you'll see one for Invoice as well. One interesting thing here is, as you go through these fields in the invoice object, invoice type. So we support invoice, so you pretty much two different types. You can be an invoice, which is hopefully in your world 99% plus of your invoices, and you're not issuing tons of erroneous credit memos because you screwed up an order. But we also support credit memos, right? So in Starline world, it's pretty funny. We use the same exact report in the output for an invoice and a credit memo. The only thing that's different is we just flip the header. So in PromoStandards world, invoice credit memos, the big note here is current currency amounts should be positive for credit memos, right? Obviously, a credit memo is something that, I'm issuing you a $100 credit memo. Don't put that as minus 100. Since it is a credit memo, put it for positive currency amounts. You can thank your accountants for that. Real quick, the next few things that I think are interesting and unique about this service. These were not in the beta version, the feedback, and we added them from good feedback. So the invoice document URL. Now, this is not a required field, but if you can support this, I would recommend you doing it. I know I have a handful of e-commerce providers that are implementing our invoice service that use this. Basically, this is when things go awry and the vouching doesn't work out like you would expect, where you're expecting an invoice for $1,000 and you get one for $998. That invoice document URL is kind of a good thing, is when a human has to get involved to load up that physical document, or for record keeping, if you're required by your state, province to store physical documents, this is a great way to do it. So it's a bit of a pain to feed up URLs for invoices, unique URLs, but if you can pull this off, I know we do. It's something that we put some effort into to make sure that we support that. But that's more, it supports your kind of regulatory and double checking efforts. And then invoice payment URL, everybody wants to get paid. It's an optional thing. So if you have that, you're probably sending this out. Many are sending this out today. When you email your invoices, you're burying a link into that email saying, hey, if you want to pay it by credit card or whatever, ACH, here's your URL to do it. Here's all your information. So that's the last field there. Purchase order version. Oddly enough, and Eric Schoenberger is going to appreciate this, is the purchase order version was a field that was in the initial PO spec, and then Paul Fleischman removed it last second and didn't tell anybody. So this is kind of future-proofing this version. So if you do happen to store different version numbers of POs in your system, this is where you would include it. I think the biggest thing you see in the wild today through PO naming conventions that we see from distributors and service providers is underscoring version numbers after the main PO. I think it's, for some reason, that's been the most widely adopted. But if you store that data, that's where you're going to put it. Payment terms, one thing, this is a string, not an int field, right? I'm not looking for 30 or 45. If you have the whole 15 net 2, if you have all those, 30 days, that just all goes in there as a string. It's human readable. There's not a lot of, and we're not doing business logic off of this field, which you really want to. Invoice date, back to that. This is a date field, not a date time. Let's talk about some invoice math. I know we focused heavily on PO math, right, of how to multiply line items to get to header amounts. We specifically spelled that out in the invoice documentation. So invoice amount is sales amount, which is over here on the bottom left. Sales amount plus shipping amount plus handling amount plus tax amount. So you have 4 fields that make up the invoice total, which is sales, which is essentially the sum of your line items, right? If you have 5 line items at 100, one unit each, then it's going to be 500. Add your shipping, add your handling, if any, add your taxes, if any. That should equal invoice total amount. So PO math and invoice math, all important. One other thing, due amount is also, pretty, we spell this out. That's why I like, as we mature as an organization, we get less ambiguous about the fields. Invoice date due, invoice amount due is the amount, invoice amount minus the advance pay. The advance pay is pretty common in this industry. So if it's 1,000, prepay 500, the amount due should be $500. So just spelling out the math, because not everybody understands concepts of prepays. Oops. Look at all those. All right, that's it for the invoice object. So that's, we're going to bounce into the invoice line items and call out some nuances here. Essentially, I talked about this earlier. Invoice line items, the header is a line item number. You probably went right over to the far right field and we're like, why isn't this required? Because technically invoices don't have to have line items. Why is that? Back up a page here. I'm going to regret that I did that because I have to go back forward. But I don't know why we do this, but internally we have things from time to time that are just shipping charges, handling charges that really aren't associated with individual line items. So the fact that invoice line items are not required is to support and allow invoices for non-sales amount field related items. It happens, a shipping amount gets missed, or a freight BOL doesn't come in until months later. So back to invoice line items. So you have your line item, you have your product ID, part ID, charge ID. We're going to talk about those in a second. Back, because I love harping on the invoice math. Extended price, this should all work out, right? So there's a few fields in here that matter. Your unit price times your quantity, that's important. Invoiced quantity, there's a bunch of different quantities here. We're going to talk about those in a second. Minus your discount amount. So if you're common in the industry, you from time to time see a invoice applied at the line item level where it'd be 2% invoice discount or whatever it is. It just handles it, right? So price times quantity that you invoice, not quantity that was ordered, minus discount equals extended price. All right, so there's a few different IDs that are here on the invoice line item. Product and part, so product IDs and part IDs go in tandem. Probably don't provide a part ID without a product ID, but I guess you can make a case for that. But every structure in PromoStandards is product, then part. So you can use product ID and part ID together, but you cannot use product ID and charge ID and intermix those. So it's pretty much either charge ID or the top two. Essentially, this is, let's say in our industry, you order 100 mugs and there's a setup charge. Your first line item is for the 100 mugs. Second line item is for the setup charge. First line item is the product ID. Second line item is charge ID. So let's go. Other nuances here. This quantity, right? So ordered minus invoiced does not equal back ordered. Back to the math here. So I'll say that again. We have an ordered field. This is from the purchase order, what the distributor order. And a lot of that times, let's say that's 100. Let's say that you can only fulfill 50 of them, right? So a lot of the supplier systems will automatically back order the remaining if the PO specified that you can ship non-complete orders. So it would be 100, shipped 50, back ordered 50. Now, technically that math won't always work out because of this awesome thing that our industry does, and every printing, the paper industry does this heavily as well. It's the concept of overs and unders. Now, we allow clarification around that in the PO standard where there is a ship exact field over there or allow for over or unders. But right here, just something to keep an eye out on, just do your quantity math. All right, so real quick, what does one of these things look like in the wild? I pulled an invoice from the Starline endpoint. what you would expect, and kind of roll through it top to bottom. You have your header information with your invoice. Basically what is this? Is an invoice or credit memo. It's an invoice, PO, invoice stuff, your line items, purchase order version, who it was sold to, aka shipped to, payment terms. Just you roll through the whole thing. You'll see in the wild here how we're using invoice URLs, we're using payment URLs, and then all your line item details. This is a pretty simple invoice because it only contains one line item. Yeah, so nothing crazy there. Pretty simple thing, but if you're watching this on the recorded version, it kind of lets you know at the end of the day what you're kind of stacking up to. Because when you're looking at all these just random fields in a cell on documentation, it doesn't always make a lot of sense. So you kind of see an example of this in the wild. So, all right, what else is there? We have this, like I said, the GetVoided invoices. So GetVoided invoices has a very similar request as the GetInvoices. Actually, it's nearly identical. You see the same fields, right? Version, ID, password, query type, which you see everywhere. Reference number, request date, all the same stuff, right? Not a lot going on here. This is a very simple method, and this is the information you're going to get, right? So essentially, this is, hey, give me a list of all of my voided invoices and what date they were voided on. And that's it, right? You see this in a lot of the other, it's kind of one of those helper functions. So this is a, if you want to go in and call this method first, get all your voided invoices, pump those back into the invoice service and get any details, you could do it that way. But yeah, in accounting land, the voided invoices, it's kind of a big deal. So, but like I said, this doesn't get used as much, but it's useful for those of you who need it. All right, let's keep going here. One thing, and I mentioned this a lot, is PromoStandards.org hosts a validation tool. This is a schema validator. So I pumped the Starline invoice service into here just to get an example. So the QR codes, as we've been going through in the documentation, or as you watch online afterwards, if you scan those QR codes, it'll bring you to the pieces that I'm talking about. So you saw one earlier that would bring you to the schema definition for invoice. This one brings you to the validation tool. So as with every service, every version, every operation / method, we validate schemas at PromoStandards. So you put in, if you're developing one of these, and see if you're adhering to the WSDL, the XSDs, you pump in your criteria and then you get a response. And sometimes you get a warning or a validation result. For example, this one doesn't like whatever's going on line 46. All right, it's mainly the invoice URL namespace is kind of jacked, but you want to make sure before you post or release an endpoint to the wild that you are validating your services. So, and if you're a BA or somebody on the business side and aren't necessarily running an XML tool, you can always just use the validation tool, pump in credentials, POs, different parameters, and see what happens with individual supplier services. So that's out there. Get after it. So here's the big sell, right? Why do invoices if you haven't? So this is my thing. There's 32 suppliers that have done invoices. This number should be 100 plus, right? The customers that we have to implement, and you message Peter too right now in Slack and ask him if this is true. For the people who implement this service, they are paying their invoices quicker. Why that? Why is that? Because they're getting the information automatically into their system. They're not waiting for a piece of mail to show up and some clerk to type in and go through and lose that piece of paper and ask for another one, or digging through spam filters, email inboxes. It's a hot mess, right? Sending these things through email, it's just, you don't have to do it that way. It works, right? There's a lot of large distributors that are OCRing invoices trying to solve this problem. This invoice service solves that problem for you. Gives you the exact same information on an invoice today in an electronic format where you can query reliably from $16 billion of the industry's volume and get your invoices right away. vouching is the grossest thing in this industry, especially, for a distributor who's doing an apparel PO, right? They have the vouch between the blank goods, the decorator, put that all back. And if you're dealing with web store vendors and just trying to match all of that, you don't need those headaches. Focus on the things that are core competencies, not trying to do paperwork. We provide that line item detail, right? This was an important service to make sure we tie the PO line item detail all the way through to the invoice. You saw us add that detail in OSN 2.0. Order status 2.0 is going to have the line item details. It was, in the earliest of PromoStandards, we kind of glanced over some of those specifics, and we realized these sophisticated systems have to have line item detail matching. So we get that all taken care of. The instant feedback, right? And we see this as we'll get calls, day of about invoices for customers who have consumed these electronically and are questioning something on an invoice. They're literally catching them before the goods have been, they're on a truck waiting to be shipped, and they're calling about an invoice because they're electronically pulling them. And I think another big selling feature is the payment URLs. So while there's a lot of pushback on usage of credit card and credit card fees in the industry, you still see a high usage of the ability to electronically consume how to pay these things right on the spot, pay that invoice right away, clear your account, be good to go. So that's that one. I got 2 more slides here, then we'll take some questions. We have a YouTube account for PromoStandards. Just go to YouTube and search PromoStandards. Or you can click that QR code there. Every education session that we do gets posted to our YouTube account. So if you're looking for past services, we've done OSN 2.0, product data, inventory. We've done a bunch of them, and we're going to make sure hopefully by the end of the year or early next year, we'll have gone through every service to make sure that, if you're looking to implement and have some questions, Jessica will probably send you to the PromoStandards video of that service first. And if we didn't answer it there, then you can kind of reach out to the community or reach out to somebody at PromoStandards. So check that out. One last thing, and then I see there's some Q&A brewing here. We're going to hit on that here second. Education PromoStandards is the 3rd Tuesday of every month, always. This has been the case for about 1.5 years now, maybe 2 years. It's 2 p.m. Eastern, 3rd Tuesday. Today we did the invoice walkthrough. We're hoping, and if Raj, Eric, and Standards Committee can deliver, we're going to do a Order Status 2.0 launch party. Standards Committee is going to, drop into education and kind of walk through the official launch of Order Status 2.0. TBD. Don't let me down, Standards Committee. Then July, Dave Schultz and his crew are going to go through the service provider highlights and implementation highlights. What the service providers do for PromoStandards is they reach a very long tail of the industry between, CommonSku, SN Performa, Facilis Group, ASI, Antera. You can go down the list. Sam and his group at Exentech. This allows PromoStandards to scale without having to have a dev team at every single supplier distributor tandem. So we're going to highlight that. A bunch of us are heading to Chicago for the ASI Chicago event, so we're going to put together hangout. Details will be out probably in the next few weeks there. Then you can kind of read it through there. One thing I want to highlight is Becky and crew are going to be launching the virtual hackathon in September. That thing's going to be awesome. It was pretty cool last year. Looking forward to that. Education that week could be everybody's favorite, PPC, media, and then you can kind of read the rest. So, there's a lot happening, and we're going to hit the old crescendo button there at the end and really have fun at the 2024 Tech Summit. So having said that, I'm going to stop the presentation. I'm going to hop into Q&A because we have some brewing, and we'll see what we got going on here. So, all right, Steve, when the service is turned on, do suppliers then turn off their, so that's a great question. So this is a communication thing between trading partners. What we have tended to do, and we'll take Peter to any promo, for example, we left his invoice, emailed invoices on for, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks, this was before we were providing the PDF URL of the invoice in the service. We left it on until they were confident that everything was matching, and we were confident that it was a one-to-one. So we tend to see when we onboard invoicing trading partners is we let them go in tandem, and then after everybody's comfortable, we shut them off. But yeah, I would say if you're a supplier, you need to have that mechanism and build that feedback loop in of this is a electronic invoice customer. Either send them both, stop sending them both, but be able to have that mechanism that you can do that. So great question, Steve. Answered live. Steve's got another question. Is there somewhere in the knowledge base that talks about the audit support transition to digital records not kept on supplier leather? It's a great question. I'm going to punt on this one unless somebody in the attendees who's here that might want to answer that. So the question is, and this is probably a state by state or province by province piece, but see, so here's that field that I talked about where you can pass the actual PDF of the invoice. This will satisfy this requirement, but you're saying if somebody doesn't support that and you are then converting a electronic invoice to a human readable format and storing that for financial records, is that acceptable? And I guess I'm not going to answer that, but I guess the workaround to that is pull the supplier's PDF via the URL. And if you want to just pull it and store it on some drive and for safekeepings, that's probably the way to do it. Hopefully that answers your question. If anybody else wants to chime in on that, I know Erica Leslie, you can raise your hand and Jessica will promote you to a panelist, but it's a great question though. I like that one. Steve's asking again. Sounds good. All right, so Steve liked that answer, so we don't have to answer more. Where did setup charges go? So that was in the setup charges go as line items, right? Because in a invoice, they're just another thing on there. So in a setup charge line item, it would just be, there's no product ID, there's no part ID, there's a charge ID, right? So call it, 1, 2, 3, 4 is the setup charge. It's got the line item description, would probably be setup charge, whatever that supplier or distributor calls it. And so a setup charge, a run charge, all of those goes in as line items stacked. We stack our line items, our product items first, and setup charges at the bottom. I've seen some people do whatever pairs together. This is the setup charge for this this product ID, and just stack them that way. So that's for the anonymous attendee question. So that was answered live. All right, any other questions before we hop off here? We had a pretty good crew watching today. All right, stay active in Slack, right? There's, Amy, Becky, Jessica, they're always posting, if you're looking for volunteer opportunities, hit us up, hit any of the MMEC, Membership Marketing Education group. Stay tuned for more things, details about Hackathon. But if we really, PromoStandards works from volunteers, right? None of us are getting paid to do this. It's all a passion that we want to, better the industry through this electronic communication and, kind of, be a part of an awesome community. So if you want to be part of that community and you want to get involved, you don't have to do a heavy lift. Just hit one of us up and we'll make sure that we plug you into the right area of PromoStandards where you can have some fun and contribute to the cause. So thank you, everybody. It's been great. Invoice, go adopt it. Hopefully by the time we get to Tech Summit, that 32 will be 64. Let's make a goal to double it. So, all right, everybody, have a good day. Thank you. Peace out.